Derivatives trading involves substantial risk of loss and is not suitable for all investors. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results.
Good morning, everyone. It is Tuesday, June 25th, 2024. My name is John Pieranunzi, and this is the opening swing. Let's begin today, as we always do, with our news. Europe is slightly down. Euro Stoxx 50 down about 0.5%. The DAX 40 a little bit more. Stoxx 600 and FTSE 100 a little bit less than 0.5%. And out of Europe, we got the Spanish GDP, Spanish PPI, also a few auctions. 7 a.m. we had Bowman, a U.S. Fed speaker, talking. That already happened. Coming into the U.S. hours, we have the Canadian CPI is happening. And as for U.S. data, we have the Chicago Fed at 8:30, a regional Fed survey, not a huge mover. And we have some house prices at 9 a.m., Case-Shiller and FHFA, as well as consumer confidence at 10 a.m., probably our most significant number today. Also, Richmond Fed, another regional Fed survey. And I saw Philly Fed mentioned is coming out today as well. That's another regional survey, but it's not on this calendar, so I'm not completely sure about that. Then we have a few Treasury announcements. Cook speaks at noon, a 2-year auction, and then Bowman again at 2:15 to round out our news today. Let's take a look at some charts, and we'll just begin very quickly with the weekly chart. Find my Epic pen here if I can, wherever it is. There it is. So on the weekly chart, the big thing that we're talking about, and we won't spend a lot of time here, but we're one time framing higher, but so far right now we are within the prior week's range. And somewhat of a skew for lower prices here because we're holding below the prior week's VPOC. I'm going to use a different color. It's not everywhere on this. But we're below the prior week's VPOC and settle. So a little bit of a skew for potentially lower prices, but we still remain one time framing higher on this time frame. So even if we would test this price, I would expect support on the initial test at or towards that price, which is 54.8975. Let's move on to our daily chart. The daily is showing a little bit more overlap in range than the weekly chart here, as you can see. And since this day, this day is Juneteenth, so it really doesn't count. I haven't cleared my holidays yet. But all of these days are moving value lower. The VPOC is moving lower on all of these days. But we're not really releasing. As I've kind of mentioned, we're testing lows and finding support, and that's really what's happening here as we kind of push into support. I'll just say I want to mention that when we see that price, at least when I see that price pushing into support like that and kind of a compressing range, I expect one of two things. Well, I expect one thing. I expect us to eventually move away from that compressed area. It could be lower or it could be higher, but we're seeing, price and value kind of compress, so we're expecting some push away at some point. And the important thing to know is our targets below. It's definitely the 5500s. These single prints below that, the prior week's low, which I just mentioned, and above. If we through the prior week settle on our MCV the next big target again would be the prior week's this is the prior week's settle. Then above the prior week's VPOC, which was tested and rejected yesterday, which is significant. Also worth mentioning on this chart, our MC VPOC in this area was in this lower sort of distribution. Yesterday it shifted higher, but we closed below, so that's worth mentioning. And of course, we also are talking about this very unauctioned area, which we're aware of, this sort of range that we have established in this area, which sort of is the lower bounds of that range. Let's go to a smaller time frame chart and discuss structure a little bit more granularly. Actually, we'll go to our TPO first, just to reiterate a couple things we've said, see them in another way. Okay, just worth reiterating here. We had these single prints, which were very important to me, as kind of the upper bounds of our range, and where the sellers kind of said that these prices above here were off limits. And we got the test yesterday, and it confirmed that they were off limits. And we have this excess going on above here. Then release lower and push value lower. I also mentioned yesterday we are seeing excesses come in on the lows, which is just to me it kind of just reiterates what we're seeing here, which is this daily chart showing us balance with a skew for lower prices, where we sort of test lower, but there's nothing really much there, and we keep coming up to the middle. Same thing on the high. We tested higher, but we keep just gravitating towards this middle as of now, and resisting breaks lower. Um, so that's what we're seeing on our TPO chart. And like I said, the real key target below here is these singles left from 618. But we'll discuss that a little bit more on our trigger chart. Let's move to that now and discuss some potential price action based on what we've been talking about. Here's our trigger chart. And let me get this evened out for you guys. Okay, so here's our trigger chart. What areas are important today? As you can see here, I've kind of marked this area. Let's actually take a look at that on an hourly chart, just so we can see it a little bit better. Just so I can show you why I've marked that area, which is kind of reiterating some of the stuff I've said already. But this area here, which is basically around 34 up to yesterday's high, I'm looking at this. This is like the upper half of our balance, but I've marked it because this is this area right here is our magnet zone, MCV pocket of the area. And this is kind of where, as you can see here, we sort of, in this balance, we sort of drifted up to the high of the balance, moved up, took out those single prints, and immediately sold off pretty hard. Let's do a different color here so we can see it. Immediately sold off pretty hard. That's not the color I'm looking for. Immediately sold off pretty hard from that test, balanced briefly, then got the continuation for the new low. And then since then, we're just kind of flagging up higher. So the key area, the very key area here, is going to be our magnet zone, which is right above the 30s to the right up to about the 35. So right in this area, 30s to 35s. We also have our 2-day VWAP in this area. So this is the key area. It's marked as the magnet zone if you are a Convergent member. Pushing above this area, then we're back in the upper part of this sort of balancy region, and holding below, then where this low becomes more vulnerable. Yesterday's low becomes more vulnerable. We also have to be aware that this could, if this area does not get directional, it could be choppy. But we'll discuss that with our plan. So let's move on now to our trigger chart now and discuss price action plans. All right, here's our trigger chart. And what areas are important today? Well, here I'll just mention we are looking at the range. This is one vola, this is two vola, this is one vola, two vola up. So we're just aware our settlement is way down here. So we have our settlement, developing overnight low, which is a slightly higher low from yesterday's RTH low. Then we have our single prints here with Sentry just below. This is really the key area that we want to be aware of on the downside. Above, we have this prior week settle region that I just talked about, which is basically 30 to 35-ish. This is the key area above. Then I have this sort of area marked as well. This is a stock zone right around the 45 to 48 area, just below the 50 strike. And then we have yesterday's high above here, and as I mentioned, We have our two vola above and a stock zone in the 65 area. So this is kind of, these are the areas that I'm looking at and what potential price action could we have. So first, I'll talk about what would be probably the best trade that we could get today. The best trade, in my opinion, or one of the best trades that we could get is if we get a setup where price either holds below the magnet zone or tests above and fails and gives us continuation. That would probably be the clearest, best trade that we could get. We also have yesterday's VPOC in this area. So how could that happen? Well, okay, so if we hold below this area, holding below this area, I could see it putting in something similar to this, which would be kind of an attempt higher, reverts, and then we start to get a lot of action between the full session mid and this area where it kind of gets a little choppy, and then we eventually just release lower, take the settlement, prior settle, maybe give some attempt like we're gonna, like it was a pullback, but then just release through, take the overnight low and yesterday's low and push and give us a continuation down to these singles. So just in a nutshell, this would probably be the most tradable scenario in my opinion. Some type of a push higher that fails to get through this magnet zone 30 to 35 region, releases lower, maybe gives us an impulse, gives us a pullback that we can trade. Maybe we get on the impulse up here to trade 4P settle if you have a setup for that, or just an impulse pullback continuation for the overnight low and a runner for the singles. This would be the best. In my opinion, this would be a trade that would be very clear. Now, once we get to these singles, we could there is potential for us to revert higher, or just as always, if the sellers are stronger, maybe we flush through and we can continue down to these 90s. This would be my extended target today. These 90s, then these 81s down here. If we continue, we start getting into our gap region. I think that if we fall through these singles and especially fall through these 90s, I think that it could be, we would obviously be out of balance, and it would, I would expect the trade to be pretty whippy if we fall through that area, but I would expect eventual support somewhere. I would expect some support below the 90s, most likely ahead of our two vola in the 65 to 70 region where I've outlined here. But anyway, let me get rid of this because now we've lost that. But anyway, the extended target for me would be these 90s if we got there. If we continue through these 81s, if we really like kind of fall through these 81s, I'm less likely to initiate short down here because these are areas that I would expect support. Like I would cease to initiate shorts below the 80s unless the context really supports it. But anyway, let's talk about one other way that could happen, because there's another important way that could happen. So we have our 30 to 35s area. The other important way that this could happen is with a test through. So our initial way of seeing this happen would be price unable to even get above the 30 to 35 area. Then we get some type of an impulse, gets the prior settle, cannot recover, and continues for our overnight low target, and maybe we get the extension for the extended target to the singles. That's one way. The other way that could happen is we get early on likely some type of an initial push higher, takes the overnight low, gets above the 30 to 35 region, starts looking like it's going to grind up to the 45s, which is the next test, and then we get the impulse back below the 30 to 35 area. Can't continue, cannot continue higher, releases lower again, and then we get the P settle test and potentially the continuation for the overnight low. And at this point, if we get the whole way up into like the 40s and really test above the 35s, we might have more potential to see the support come in around the singles region. And again, if we only test down to about the singles, or even if we get to the 90s, and we get a reversal back into range, then again, it'll be very similar. Then I would expect it to end up being very similar to the price action that I sort of outlined on the TPO chart, where we see the excesses at the lows, and then we end up kind of pushing back higher and settling into range. So that would be potential to happen, the reversion at the singles or possibly at the 90s. Those are areas where I could see reversion. And if we get back in range, then the shorts would mostly be done, in my opinion, if we get back into range and we're able to start clawing back above P settle and hold. But anyway, so that's category one of things we could get today, which would either be a hold below 35s that continues for the overnight low, or a test above that gives us some type of structure, then fails lower, and then we trade that. That would be probably the primary expectation, or the trade that would be potentially the easiest to do. What happens if we don't get that? How about a directional push above the 35s? If we get a directional push above the 35s, okay, the two ways it could happen: maybe we keep holding these FS levels, and then we get a strong impulse that kind of reprices us. Oops. We get a, sorry about that. We get a strong directional push that reprices us higher above these 35s, in which case we get sort of a uh, just sort of a sloppy trend up into the 45s to target the 46, 45 zone, which is up here. This would be the target area above 35s for me. That's kind of a setup for me. When I see like an impulse, quick pullback, and then just a kind of a trend, I'll lean against this area. That's not really a setup. Not really teaching a setup, but that's one way I would look for it: impulse, hold, continue, and grind. It could happen that way, or the other way it could happen is you could just kind of grind very sloppily through the 35s, and that would look like we're going to get an impulse lower, with like kind of a sloppy grind. But instead of getting that impulse that takes the low, we just instead get a sloppy grind that just keeps holding those lows and giving us a grind up into that 45 target area, and then from the 45s may impulse, like we get the grind here, but then the impulse here. Or we could see it happen where we get that grind to the up to the 45, 48, 45 area, and then the impulse happens that reverts lower back into the overnight range or below these 30s. So once again, just very quickly, how could the bullish idea happen? The bullish idea could happen with an impulse above the 35s that then trends into the 45, 46, 48 region to target. If we continue to hold there, then we look for the area, the 57, 55, 54 area, which is the prior week's VPOC, basically 54 to 58, yesterday's high. So the impulse and then grind, or we could get the grind and then impulse above the 45, 46 area that then potentially may continue or may see reversion. But so that's really the key area for directional trading, in my opinion, these 30s to 35s. For shorts, I'm looking for either a hold below that continues or a quick test above that then fails back below. That's what I'm looking for on the short side. On the long side, I'm looking for either an impulse, reprice, and then trend to these 48s region, or I'm looking for a slogging grind that holds, looks like it might be the short setup, but then ends up giving us a little bit more of a push to this 46 to 48 area. Extended target on the high side, on the upper side, would be 54 to 58, yesterday's high. If we break above yesterday's high and continue, I would just use the zones to guide me, because I'm not really expecting excursion above yesterday's high today, same as I'm not really expecting excursion below these 90s, although I think the excursion below the 90s could be a bit more possible, but a little bit more difficult to trade. But those are the two big tradable ideas, and they both really revolve around what do we get in this 30 to 35 area. So the third idea, which is the nothing scenario, is what happens if instead we get just chop around this area, which could look like a lot of those scenarios, but we have to be careful because that might be what we get. When we have an area that's very clear, like a clear over underline, a lot of times it just chops above and below and doesn't really give us anything until later in the day. So if we get that, like just a choppy move, I'll probably wait for clarity, wait for some type of clarity if we just start to chop around this early in the session. As well, something else that we sometimes get is that immediate repricing that I kind of mentioned could be part of a scenario. If you're able to get on it, great. But just an immediate repricing that then chops around another key area. So the other key area would be this 46, 48 region roughly. We could get the repricing up to there, which would be part of a scenario, and then we chop around there and have to wait for a scenario or wait for a setup to happen, or we could just fall very quickly up here down to below the RTH low, and then the chop could happen between about oh 05 and 15s. Yesterday 14.5 is yesterday's RTH low, so we could get the quick repricing lower, and it could chop in this area. But that's what I'm seeing today. Key area for me, 30 to 35 is the magnet zone. I'm looking for a directional move away from it at some point today that could be tradable. If we do not get a directional move away from it and instead chop, I will be sitting on hands. But if we get that directional move above, like I said, 46 to 48s, then potentially 54s to 58s. And if we get the directional move lower, we're looking for yesterday's low to the overnight low, then the key target, the singles at the 05, 03 region. We get below that, 90s. That's what I'm looking at today. I hope that's helpful to you guys. I hope it's reasonably complete. I hope you're having a great day, and I hope that continues. I hope you can somehow improve your trading today. And as always, I hope you can do the most important thing, which is just make somebody else smile, because that's the best way to really have a good day. It's infectious. That's what I got for you. I hope everyone's doing well, and I'll be here tomorrow to do the same thing again. We'll see you. Bye-bye.